Just quickly on my side, my name is Zach, Product Marketing Manager here at Revelator. If you haven't heard of us before, we are an independent platform built for independent music businesses with global team across 5 continents. We work with label, distributors, and rights holder around the world, helping them manage distribution, royalty accounting, rights management, analytics, and global payments. We essentially take care of the back office so labels can focus on what actually matters, which is building artist career and catalogs and growing great music. Recently, we launched also a bespoke label services offering, helping indie teams with marketing support, DSP pitching, and strategic planning. So very excited to get started on our first webinar. And I know today it's something that a lot of teams are thinking about, essentially is how to grow an audience on DSPs beyond playlists. And for that, we have a very special guest, Sam Lee, who's the founder of Songular and also worked at Deezer for a few years. So I guess, Sam, to get started, if you can tell us about a bit more about yourself, we can give the audience a bit more background.
Of course. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So my name is Sam Lee. As Zach has said, I run a company called Songular here in the UK. Since 2016, we've been working with a brilliant roster of artists and music companies, helping them to run better streaming campaigns. So we're looking to build their audience on digital platforms and streaming platforms. We're covering things like campaign strategy, so making sure that we've got the framework in place for success. We're covering things like digital partnerships, so making sure that music teams and partners at streaming platforms are aware of what's going on and are able to support the artists that they love. We're covering things like algorithmic strategy, helping make sure that our clients' profiles are optimized for the algorithm to work its magic. And all of this is underpinned by a real focus on audience insights, making sure that we know who is listening, how they're engaging with the music, and where the opportunities are. So I'm excited to get stuck in. This should be a good conversation. Thanks again.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for taking the time to do this. There's a lot to uncover. We try our best to run through the series of questions. But I guess to start really is in 2025, streaming been around for a long time. And having worked at Deezer in 2014, which is almost crazy to think about, it's 10 years ago. Now, with a company like yours, working with frontline artists, how have you seen the streaming playbook evolve? What outdated ideas do artists and labels still cling on to? And what's been the biggest change across streaming and playlists, in your opinion?
Where do we start? If we're going back to when I started at Deezer, which was in 2012, for context, Spotify launched New Music Friday in 2014. So editorial wasn't even really a consideration. We were kind of trailblazers in our own way at Deezer at that point, because we had one editorial playlist called the Deezer 10. Deezer's a French company, and that playlist name works better in French as Deezer Deez. But we had one playlist called the Deezer 10, which was updated once a week with 10 new tracks. And that was kind of the extent of our editorial offering. Other than that, we had a banner on the top of the website and tiles on the homepage and things like this. But the playlisting element of streaming was really non-existent at that point. Fast forward a few years and Spotify and other platforms were offering editorial as a real focus. And so at that point, the editorial playlist landscape became a real shortcut to success for artists. And you saw loads of examples of relatively undeveloped artists having enormous hits from sort of 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, doing hundreds and hundreds of millions of streams purely because a song would perform well in one or a batch of playlists on Spotify. What you saw after that was that the next song often didn't perform quite as well, or that tickets went on sale and there was a bit of a wake-up call. But there was this real sugar rush of sort of streaming success at that point. And then over the next 5, 6, 7 years, bringing us to now, you've seen the editorial landscape grow a bit more fragmented, a lot broader. And the big change that we've seen on platform is the increase in algorithmic streaming, personalized playlists. Your home screen is personalized. Everyone gets a slightly different experience based on their listening habits. So I think you asked about outdated ideas. The idea that a single playlist ad is a major victory now is an outdated one, but it's one that people still cling on to. It's still a key metric for a lot of people. We need to look at it in a bit more of a holistic way. We need to be a little bit broader with that approach. And I think the other point that I see coming up regularly is this idea that the algorithm is this kind of mythical body that may or may not look upon you favorably. The reality is the algorithm, and I'm saying the algorithm, there's lots of algorithms on Spotify, but we'll call it the algorithm for simplicity. The algorithm is part of your strategy, and there are things you can be doing to optimize for success through that. And really, the way the algorithm operates is to reward quality listens and engagement. So you should already have a fan engagement strategy to be pushing for that kind of consumption and engagement on streaming platforms. So you should already be thinking about the algorithm as part of your main commercial or marketing strategy. I think people's approach to it as this kind of separate entity is unhelpful and leaving a lot on the table.
I think that's such a great point. And also just thinking about how people see playlists in general, where you have obviously the big flagship playlists, your New Music Fridays, New Music Daily, and also the more niche playlists, whether it's the mood playlist, more genre-specific playlists. It's also sometimes put in the same bucket where in fact they play a very different role with each other. Obviously, if you have a track that gets onto New Music Daily or New Music Friday, it's amazing win. But if the track is an underground techno release or something very niche, it might not connect because it's not actually the right audience. So I think it has changed a lot in terms of the amount of playlists available and their purpose in how they serve different fan base.
That's definitely true. I remember a few years ago saying to someone at a label that perhaps a high New Music Friday positioning wasn't what we wanted on this track because it was so niche and underground, and basically getting fired because there's still this kind of competitive edge to it and you want that high positioning. But you're right. And I think with a lot of this new wave of personalized playlists that you see on Spotify, so just for clarity on that as well. So you'll have editorial playlists like New Music Friday, where an editor or a group of editors will go through and select the track listing, the running order. That's all done by humans. And then you have personalized playlists where an editor will select a pool of tracks, say 300 or so tracks, and then the algorithm will select from that pool of tracks and recommend them to people based on what they've been listening to before. So with those playlists, you could see yourself get an ad to a personalized playlist with 1 million followers and start popping the champagne and think, this is it, here come the streams. The reality is, you might not see that many streams from that kind of playlist initially, but other side of the coin is the streams that you do get from that will be of a higher quality because the algorithm is recommending it to people that have got relevant tastes. So follower count is a really bad way of figuring out how impactful a playlist is going to be. Really, you need to be a little bit more cautious with how you're judging these. And sometimes the opposite happens. You see a playlist that has very few followers, but gets really good engagement, and that can be a nice surprise. So I would say take the follower count with a pinch of salt and understand that there are different levels of playlists there where you can go in at a starter level, an early level, work through some of the smaller lists, hopefully graduate to some of the bigger lists, and then you can start seeing that kind of evolution through the ecosystem that you saw to great effect 5-6 years ago. It still happens.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think just in general, there's a lot of data available across Spotify for artists or other DSPs, and it's often quite difficult to know what actually are the key metrics that are the most interesting and the most important one. In your opinion, what are the 2 or 3 metrics that you find are the one that people should actually look at the most?
So I think rather than there being a couple of specific data points that I would say everyone should look at, it's about piecing together all of these various bits of data to understand what's happening across the board. That said, streams per listener in Spotify for Artists is a great one to start off with. If you're coming out of that first weekend on Spotify with 4 or 5 streams per listener, then something's working quite well. You want to be looking at the save percentage and the playlist ad percentage as well in Spotify for Artists. Work that out against the number of listeners that you've got on a track, not the number of streams, and then you'll get quite an accurate picture of how many people, what percentage of people are engaging in a way that shows intent to stream again. And then there's some more, you can get a little bit more creative with it. There's some nice qualitative data you can pull out of somewhere like Spotify for Artists too. Personally, I love monitoring the user playlist ads on the platform. So not just the number of additions from Spotify users into their own playlists, but looking at the type of playlist that they're adding them to and getting a sense of how they're consuming your music and what sort of situations they're bringing your music into. So you can get a really good idea of who your audience is and sort of what their approach to listening to your music is. Like you might see you're getting a load of playlist ads to playlists like chill vinyasa flow, or you might find that it's like heavy metal half marathon or something like this, and you can get an understanding of where people are listening, how they're consuming, and that can give you some real nice insight into who's listening and how. And then there's some other little bits in Spotify for Artists, like if you look for the on repeat playlist, you can see that's an algorithmic playlist that recommends to people the songs that they've been listening to the most, so you can see which of your tracks people are really sticking with and coming back to time and time again. That can give you a nice idea of what's most sticky, which tracks maybe don't have the biggest numbers but have got the most loyal listenership. There's all things like that that you can look at. I think that there's a nice part of it is being a bit creative and trying to, you've got a bit of a patchwork quilt when it comes to the data available to you. You're pulling a bit from Spotify for Artists, a bit from Apple Music for Artists, a bit from Amazon for Artists, a bit from creators. You got your Instagram, TikTok, look on Chartmetric. You just bundle it all into one pot and try to make sense of it. And that's part of the fun.
I think also on that point is once you have all this data and you start making sense, how do you make decision? Like, how do you make the right decision? Do you have like a framework or set of Google questions that you start with on how to build a real strategy around your artists and releases that you're working on?
It comes back to having that overview of the bigger picture. So you might, whenever we start off a campaign, I'm always looking at what's the audience on streaming platforms and divide that up by platform. What's their demographic? Where are they? Do the same on socials. And then you'll start to see patterns emerging here. You'll start to see that your audience on one streaming platform is different to another. You'll often see that your Spotify audience is different to the others because of the algorithmic side of the platform that's really powerful. You might see that your demographic on TikTok is completely different to Spotify and Apple Music. You start seeing these gaps, you start seeing these patterns, and then you can start digging into the reasons behind that. You can start trying to piece together what it all means. But you need that kind of overview of all of this to get an understanding of it, because otherwise you're looking at one platform in isolation and it's really hard to make sense of what that means. So look at all of your platforms, get a sense of who's listening, try to see how they're listening as much as possible. Like I say, you can look at the playlist that they're adding the music to, and then start digging into why any patterns or gaps might be there and start exploring strategies to get all of that lined up. That's how I start any campaign, is we want to define a really clear set of objectives based on that audience data that we're seeing. And then I guess from my perspective, working on the streaming campaign, the next thing that we want to do is to be able to spot any opportunities that we're seeing in that data, and that can come from other platforms. It doesn't have to be from streaming specifically. And we want to be able to communicate those strategies and communicate that data with partners at Spotify, Apple, other DSPs. So if we're seeing a spike in engagement somewhere, we want to be able to spot why that's happened. We want to be able to understand it and communicate that really quickly with music teams at DSPs. And we can understand that better if we've got an overview of the big picture and we've got a real sense of how this thing exists in the broader audience picture. So that's what I would say. You got to look at the whole thing. Try and it's hard because there's not always the level of data that in other industries you have access to, but you got to try and pull out these scraps wherever you can, bundle them all together, and you do see some kind of messy picture starting to emerge from that.
I guess that's what we call feeding the algorithm in a way, that just to then understand what the patterns are and why everything is connecting, where, and that kind of build around that. I guess the strategy is never to try to play for the algorithm. It's just having a strategy that makes sense as a holistic view and making sure that it's aligned with the goals of the campaign. But I think you're right. It's once you understand the touch points, it helps basically understand how the so-called algorithm actually work in a way, because I'm sure that's how the algorithm is looking at, is where this data is connected in a way.
100%. It's got to be holistic. And I love how we talk about the algorithm as if it's a pet.
Yeah.
We feed it, we warm it up, we take real care of it in the hope that that love might be reciprocated, I guess. But look, so when you're talking about algorithmic optimization, like I said before, you don't have to do something completely different to what you're already doing. You should be focusing on fan engagement and bringing that across onto streaming platforms. That's the key for me. That said, when we're talking about algorithmic optimization, it's mostly about increasing the visibility across an artist's profile rather than on specific tracks initially. So there's some fairly straightforward housekeeping stuff you can do to help the algorithm to identify and position the artist correctly. So you want to make sure that you've got a complete profile on Spotify. So you've got your artist pick is selected and you've got an image behind the artist pick, because that gives better engagement. You want to make sure that you've delivered lyrics. You want to make sure that you've got canvases uploaded, and that you can do to play the game. Do it, because it probably helps with the algorithmic positioning. You want to make sure you've got plenty of music. That also helps it to pick up on what genre you are. But the main thing alongside that is to be giving it opportunities to identify you as a similar artist to other artists that you want to be alongside. So an easy way that you can do this is through artist playlists on your profile. So if you set up an inspirations playlist, or my favorite tracks playlist, or a collaborators playlist, or whatever, something that puts your music alongside the artists that you want to be seen alongside, and for the algorithm to recommend you alongside, there's not a kind of immediate spike, but it will be over time. You'll see that your positioning gets better and more accurate, and you'll see that kind of increase in baseline algorithmic activity across the profile. And then when we're talking about individual tracks, a lot of the work is done in advance with all that. But what you want to be pushing for is you want to front load your streams as much as possible into the first 24 hours. A few studies show that you do that, you get a longer algorithmic tail after release. So you want to align your organic streams, people coming to your profile and listening actively, your editorial streams, New Music Friday, things like that, and your algorithmic streams, Release Radar. You want all of those to hit at the same time so that you get that initial 24-hour impact. And then that gives you a bit of an algorithmic boost on launch after then. So you can also look at something like a PR campaign to target media outlet owned playlists. That can help if they're super relevant. That can help get you in the right kind of places. Third party playlist campaigns, if they're from a trusted source. If they're not, don't do them because they can be dodgy. All of these things that just help the algorithm to see, here's your artist, here are similar artists. We want to recommend them to the same kind of people. That's what you want to be driving towards. And it's a kind of long build, there's not an instant uplift necessarily, although we can chat about sometimes where there might be in a minute, but that will help with the overall health of your algorithmic profile.
And I think for anyone actually looking to pitch to editors and have the best chance of landing a playlist, do you have any tips on how to have a really good pitch? And even though things are quite limited in terms of the amount of characters, but just a few things that people can do to help them land a playlist, or at least have a best chance of being considered for one.
So I think when we're talking about pitching for playlists, there's kind of two sides to that. There's one side which is the back end pitch, we'll call it. So pitch in Spotify for artists, or through the Apple pitch form, or through whatever a label would tend to have access to in some cases. we'll focus on Spotify for the time being. So you get 500 characters. You don't get the chance to say very much. So it's very much about making it high impact, packed with information, and trying to get a bit of personality in there as well. But before you even get to that, the most important thing is the genre tagging on the Spotify pitch. So you can click on it. I'm sure everyone's done it. You can click on it. You can scroll through hundreds and hundreds of different genres and try and find the one that's most applicable for you. That's the thing that a Spotify editor will be searching by. So that's the thing that you need to get right. There's no point. You need to realistically think about the playlists that you want to be targeting and think about the genres that are in those playlists. And sometimes you can be quite niche with it. If you want to be in a tech house operator, the playlist, then you're going to need to put tech house as your genre and not something like dance, where you might think, oh, we'll cast the net wide and probably get more. So there are times where you want to be super specific with this, but just really think about it, because I think a lot of the time I'll go into a pitch after someone's done it and that will be the thing I'll change. It's like, actually, these genres are not applicable. This is what you think they are. But this is when we're actually looking at the playlist that we're targeting, you got to be a little bit strategic about it and a little bit calculated with it and choose those really carefully. And then once you've done that, you get 500 characters and you've got to put yourself in the editor's shoes. I think I consider myself lucky for having been a music editor at Deezer for 4 years. So I've kind of always tried to put myself in that position of, I'm scrolling through 1,000 releases that I need to program this week. What's going to make me care? And you just got to figure out what that is, really. It can be anything. It can be the story behind a song, can be the thing that lands. It could be a collaborator who the platform is a big fan of. It can be your plans around touring or your plans around sync or anything like that. You got to just use your initiative a little bit with it. But put yourself in their shoes. Think, why of the 100-odd thousand songs released today should this be one that they care about? And if you do that and get the genre tagging right, then you've got as good a chance as anyone of getting in front of the right people. The second part of the pitching process, and probably the bigger value add from my perspective, is a longer term artist development, narrative building, storytelling piece of this, where we're trying not to be limited to 500 characters here. We're trying to pull out what the creative thread through a campaign is and tell that story to the right people at the right time. I guess that's the bit that someone like me or a label or a distributor can help to bring on top of just the kind of back end pitching. To do that really well, last point on this is just get music delivered early. This is the thing I say all the time. You don't get many chances for an editor to come across your music when they're going through the back end looking for things to program. On the off chance they find your music and love it, if you don't have anything else there for them to check out, if you've got an album coming in 3 weeks' time and haven't delivered it to DSPs yet, you've missed your big opportunity, because they can't dig any deeper then. They're not going to go off platform and find it and come back and program. It's got to all be in the same place. So as much as possible, getting it, if you're looking at an EP or an album project, get the whole thing delivered up front, and then you can start telling the story across the whole campaign. Even if that's just through 500 character pitches, you can start telling that story. You can start weaving that narrative through everything else that you're doing. They can see the creative throughout the whole thing. It gives people confidence that the thing that they're back in is actually going to happen, because a lot of time things get pushed back and don't ever materialize. So that would be my big advice. Get things delivered early, be really thoughtful about your genres, and just try to put yourself in the editor's shoes when you're writing that pitch.
No, so true. I think when we say early is really at least 2 weeks, if not more, because like you said, everyone is very busy. There's more music being delivered than ever. So it's really important to have everything in place and really being delivered everything on time. So just,
I think if you're looking at a single 2 weeks minimum, if you're looking at a bigger project than that, you really want it months ahead. Like yeah. That's the reality of it. You don't have to, and you won't miss deadlines, but you want that living in their ecosystem for as long as possible, so that they've got as many chances to come across it as possible. Whereas if you've got an album campaign and you've got 4 singles and then the album, those are 4 pitches ahead of the album coming out, 4 opportunities for someone to come across it and then dig into the album and bookmark that and make a note of it. If the album's not there, they can't do that. So it's a real waste.
No, totally. And So let's say your campaign is going well. Maybe you've got a couple of playlists, and what's next? So there's a lot of talk about doing versions, waterfall strategies, and remixes, and how to expand on a campaign that lasts more than a couple of weeks after the release is out. I'd love to get your input on what strategy labels and artists can take to make sure that their campaign lasts for a long time, and how to really make the most out of their releases.
So I think the first thing that comes to mind is that a lot of the time an artist will release something and then release something on a Friday, and then by the following Wednesday, to them it's old news. They've been sat on this thing for a while. So there's a tendency to go on to the next one. Pressing pause on that and cooling off a little bit, and remembering that if 5,000 people have listened to it in the first week, there's still a lot of people that haven't listened to that song. There's still a lot of people that's going to be new to. So don't be afraid to continue to work a track that's already out, or going back into your catalogue if you're seeing something that's performing well, even if it was 2 years old. Don't be afraid to come back to that, circle back and give that a push, because there are so many people that you can introduce your music to. The idea of discovery now is more about discovering new audiences rather than new songs. So I think don't be afraid to hesitate and just stay on a track for a little bit longer. If you're looking at the data after a couple of weeks and you're seeing absolutely nothing, then you don't have to keep flogging a dead horse. But don't be afraid just to pause and let it bed in a little bit, let people get to know it, and then make a decision on what you want to do. In terms of what you can do from then, so you mentioned versions. A new version of a track can be a really nice way of, you can maintain consistency a little bit without needing to constantly release new music. You can keep up that release cadence that platforms favor and algorithms favor. But I think the key point for me on new versions is they have to have artistic value in and of themselves to be effective. So don't do it for the sake of doing it. But if there's a kind of artistic angle or something that works creatively, then 100% that should be going out. They can be particularly impactful when you combine them with a collaboration. So if you were looking at, like, a case this would work really well is if you're an artist from country A and you were looking to break into country B. If you collaborate with an artist from country B, you will tap into their algorithmic streaming a little bit and the algorithm will help you reach some of their fan base. B, if they're listed as a primary artist on the metadata, then they have the ability to pitch it in Spotify for artists as well. So if they've already had some support, it will help coming from their side and you can break into editorial like that. And C, it just, with the organic and the kind of active listenership, it helps to build that story around you and your positioning and just sort of where you exist culturally. So that can be a way of giving a track a second life, or breaking into a new market, or just extending the kind of timeline or lifespan of a track, would be to team up with someone else and do that. That's why remixes work so well. If you're looking at moving on to the next release, then waterfalling is a strategy that can work well, where you put the previous track as the second track on the new product with the new single as the first track. I would say it works best when the previous track already has some algorithmic traction, when you're seeing something picking up already on that front. When you do that, or when you're seeing that and you waterfall the product, sometimes you'll see that algorithmic boost on the previous track and then also carry over onto the new track. So it's a kind of halo effect, I guess, on that old track that was performing well. So there's a couple of things that you can do just like that. I think generally speaking, the big thing is just like, you got to keep talking to your fans about this music, because if you don't do that, nobody else is going to. So you got to keep on reminding people that it's out. It doesn't have to be cringe or cheesy or too desperate. You just got to, the music is the product and you've got to market it. So it's a case of just staying active, not moving on to the next thing straight away because it's old news. And then if there are strategies to extend it when you're seeing life on something already, then those are a few options for you.
I love what you said about maintaining the artistic value of everything that you do this kind of the strategy, whether it's remixes, collaborators, new version, it really has to make sense. Be in line with the artist's sound, and also making sure that it's in line artistically where they want to be.
100%. And can quickly plug a platform that I have no involvement with whatsoever, but use all the time. It's a platform called Music Tomorrow, where you can see how the algorithm identifies your music and puts you alongside similar artist clusters. So if you were looking to do a remix or a feature or a collaboration, you can see on a kind of cluster map other artists that the Spotify algorithm identifies you as similar to. So if you're looking for algorithmic reach, that can be a really nice way of starting to think about who might make sense to work with.
Totally. No, that's a good plug. Definitely one to use for sure. And just quickly on your thought in terms of budget, now you have quite a lot of tools available, especially on Spotify. We can talk about the various tools that they have, Marquee, Showcase, and Discovery Mode. But just do you have any thought in terms of how to spend the budget and where does that make sense and which tool to use, if any?
I always use these paid on-platform Spotify tools as something to supplement your main strategy rather than being kind of the driving force. But there's times where they work well. Marquee can be something where you get the full screen pop-up on mobile for a new release. If you're coming back as an artist and you've got a fan base and you need to re-engage them, let them know you're back, that can be quite a good way of doing that. If you're looking at targeting people in certain markets, again, it can be quite effective. You just got to be careful with the cost on it because you end up spending a lot, and you've got to just track the return on investment there quite carefully. So always try and start small, see what works. And it's the same with any other kind of paid media. If it works, then keep on pushing it. Just test it in different markets, and you can test different audience segments on it as well. I guess the big one is discovery mode for Spotify in terms of their on-platform tools. And it's something that I'll use wherever possible. There's obviously a element to it that where it reduces your royalties from streams from within discovery mode sources by 30%. So you're going to take a bit of a cut. But if you're strategic about how you use it and don't just plaster it on everything, then you can see it's quite effective. In fact, sometimes it's incredibly effective, where you'll see streaming shoot up like this when you turn it on. So I think the key with it for me is track it carefully, monitor it carefully, use it strategically. So if you're seeing a track that's already, again, these things don't do the heavy lifting for you. You've got to already have a bit of traction. You've got to already get to a point where the algorithm is recommending your music to people. There's that organic engagement on a track or a release. If you're at that point, pressing go on discovery mode can be really effective in taking it to the next level. Or you could use it, you could monitor your catalogue performance and see which songs in your catalogue are performing well. Maybe you've got a new release coming up in a few months. You want to re-engage listeners, remind them that you exist. That could be an option then to press go on discovery mode on your catalogue. So as long as you're strategic with it, again, and use it to supplement your main strategy rather than as your strategy, I think that they're all things to consider. With the ones where you have to spend up front, my advice would always be start small. Think about where you want to target. Sometimes the biggest markets aren't always the easiest to break through on those things. You won't see the most impact. So think about what you're trying to achieve, and you can use those to get towards that.
I think that's a really good advice. It's not easy to work out a budget in advance when you rely on the success of how the music is connecting with the audience. But I think, starting small is definitely a wise way to approach things. Just moving a bit from Spotify. I think we've talked a lot about opportunities on Spotify, but I'd love to get your take on other platform and other specific opportunities, DSPs like SoundCloud and YouTube Music and Apple Music too, just to get a bit of feedback of things that maybe people are not thinking about as much because we are sometimes too focused on Spotify, and obviously it's the biggest platform, but I think it's important to really look at other DSPs as well.
I spend all my time telling people not to focus solely on Spotify, and then I spend 40 minutes of a 45-minute webinar talking solely about Spotify. So I'm aware of the hypocrisy there. But look, I think the key to a really effective streaming campaign is about using all of these platforms to their strengths. So as much as possible, we want to be controlling the things that we're able to have an impact on. So we want to be able to maintain control over, well, for something like YouTube, for example, YouTube Music, there's YouTube Shorts. For an artist who's got a really strong content plan and can blend that with an audience-focused streaming strategy, there's a real opportunity to have crossover impact on YouTube. You've got the user-generated content side of the platform that drives it all forward. You've got the kind of traditional streaming platform built into that. So you've got all these different formats and tiers that sort of encourage, you've got discovery, community building, consumption, and YouTube is one that is growing really fast and is one that people need to be putting at the front of their streaming strategy from yesterday, basically, because it can be really powerful. That's a big focus for me, working alongside social media teams to make sure that this is all lined up. We're not just focusing on TikTok, but this is kind of coming onto YouTube as well. Something like SoundCloud, you've got the ability to DM your biggest listeners. You can comment, and like the quick fire uploading mechanism means it feels like quite a natural home for a lot of artists and somewhere they're comfortable leaning into. You've got somewhere like Bandcamp, where for artists who might get overlooked by some more like traditional DSPs, Bandcamp offers some great editorial opportunities. They can be pretty niche in the stuff they support. They're super album focused and they require quite a long lead time when it comes to editorial pitching, but building a community of fans on there for artists with a certain type of audience can be really valuable. And outside of that, I think as much as possible, artists should just be trying to meet their fans where they are, because there are so many platforms and everyone's got so many apps on their phone, and you're competing with Netflix and you're competing with so many other things that as much as possible, you should be trying to make it really easy for your fans to be engaging with you. So that's why things like WhatsApp groups are great. Discord, you want to minimize the friction between fans getting to know you and being able to join these communities, because that, for me, platform fatigue is something that we're going to see more and more of. That's why mailing lists are great, or something like Lalo, where you can text your fans, get into their house, not physically, but in terms of your messaging.
Well, there's a band actually that had a whole strategy of playing gigs at people's houses. I forgot their names, but they had an amazing campaign where actually fans were requesting them to play at their house parties, and it just got viral. And
I think I saw that. Was it All American Rejects did something like that similarly?
So you never know. It might be a good idea to turn up at people's houses and start playing.
Ask permission first.
But I love that. I think the connection with fans and being genuine and have a real kind of community being built around your artist is such an important narrative. And at the end of the day, that's really what matters, is building a community around your artist. And it's a two-sided ways in a way. You can't expect to put out something and just things to connect. You have to put in the work and really nurture this fan base that you've built. So I think it's really important to remind ourselves of that for sure.
I agree.
I think I'm just looking whether or not we have some questions. But before we look at that, just quickly, just wanted to get your thought on what to watch out for in 2026 and kind of new trends that you're seeing that you think we should be paying attention to moving forwards.
The one that brings to mind and won't be news to anyone is the rise in AI generated music and how that has an effect on saturation on these platforms, which are already oversaturated. I think that something needs to happen to be able to create different tiers of listening there so that you can have different depth of experience depending on what you're looking for. So that's obviously the big one. We're seeing a lot about it now, that AI band, Velvet Sundown and others who are racking up millions of monthly listeners, mainly because of the negative press around it, ironically. But I think you'll just see more and more of that. And we need to have a plan in place to deal with that as an industry. And then anecdotally, people are leaving traditional DSPs in favor of other alternatives. So I think artists and teams need to prepare for that to continue. They need to own their channels of communication with fans as much as possible, set up that mailing list, get that WhatsApp group sorted. You got to be able to withstand the kind of change that's coming, and the only way to do that is to have ownership of all of this stuff. So that would be my advice on next year.
Yeah, totally. I think feeling more in control of your data and having a direct access to fund without relying on paid options and platform. No one knows in 20 years what platform will be the next big one. So I think you're right. It's important to really build that up now rather than later. Just quickly going through the question, there's quite a lot coming through. I have one about if you have any example of artists from the past 12 months that you feel are really nailing their streaming and social strategy that you've seen and that you've seen kind of worth mentioning about.
Just from a personal perspective, I came across a band called Get Down Services, who are a two-piece band from Bristol in the UK, on a Spotify playlist. I think it was a playlist called Untitled about 3 months ago. And I thought the music was great. The song was called Eat Quiche, Sleep Repeat, which stood out for obvious reasons. And so I went onto their profile. They had the EP countdown page live. They had merch listed. They had tour dates listed. I pre-saved the EP. I go onto YouTube. I watch a couple of their live videos. And then a couple of months later, their Glastonbury BBC session gets recommended to me. I dig a bit deeper again. They've got more stuff on Spotify by that point. Talking to friends about going to see them live. I've stumbled across their fan page website, quite an old school website with all like fan art and stuff on it. There's a band with 600,000 monthly listeners, so they're not enormous, but it's like all of this stuff feels really intentional and really well thought out, and everything I came across made me get them a little bit more and like them a little bit more. And so it's not strictly a streaming strategy, but I think just being able to be able to see that, to go through that funnel myself from discovery at the top of the funnel on a playlist through to I'm now on the fan club website and buying tickets has been really interesting. So Get Down Services is a band for people to have a look at and see what they're doing. Other than that, just look, generally speaking, look at what Ed Sheeran does and do that is probably the advice that you can't go too far wrong with.
That's a good one. Is despite being a superstar, he still kind of really feels really connecting to his fan base, and it does feel genuine. You can tell that it's not false. So that's such a good point. There's some other question, more technical ones about YouTube. How would you utilize Google Ads to boost profile of videos? I don't know if you had any thought on that.
No idea. I don't really touch paid media, so not sure.
There you go. And what are the best tools you would recommend? You mentioned Music Tomorrow. Is there any others that we should be mentioning that are useful? I'm thinking out loud, like Chartmetrics or maybe.
I use Chartmetric. I use Music Tomorrow. I use the DSPs platforms. I know people like sound charts as well. There's Luminate, which is a bit more in depth, I think, on the data side. You can normally make a pretty good fist of a campaign using those.
That's good. And for anyone asking whether we will be sending a recap of this webinar, we absolutely will. We are recording it, so we'll be sending to everyone a recording. So don't worry about not taking notes or having the information that you need. Also, there's a question about Submit Hub. Is getting your music into curated playlists through tools like Submit Hub still effective? Since I noticed Spotify is getting more and more strict with artificial streaming and without clear reason to the ban cases. I think this is such a good point about third-party playlist services. I'd love to get your take on that.
Generally, my advice to people is if you're even 1% in doubt about it, don't do it, because there are a lot of shady operators. Submit Hub, Groover, Unheard, they're all reliable. They do checks to make sure that the playlists that you're able to pitch to through their platforms are legit. I think that website, Is It a Good Playlist, is still live, where you could put in a playlist URL and it would come back with a audit on whether it's dodgy or legit. That might be something to keep an eye on as well. But like in terms of is it still effective, it can be. And I think, again, if it's part of a broader strategy, then it can be. If you're doing it, there's a couple of times people would normally do it. One is just to get things off the ground and to get a few thousand streams under their belt. That I get that. Two would be a major label pushing for chart position. They'd just chuck thousands of pounds at something to try and get it into the top 10 or whatever and try and drive a few 100,000 streams. Again, I get it. don't necessarily agree with it, but I understand it. I think in the middle is the bit where you want to be a bit careful, because if your objective is to be super targeted and get your music into playlists with other relevant artists to help with the algorithmic positioning and visibility, then that can make sense. If the aim is to get from 15,000 streams to 17,000 streams, then is it really? I'm not sure it's necessarily worth it. But that said, if you can build up a network of peers and contacts and you can start having these conversations in a bit more of a natural way, then that's always good as well. I think if you're able to tap into particularly label and artist-owned playlists where they've got a bit of cultural capital alongside just the consumption numbers, then that starts to have a bit of a broader impact as well. So I would say it's worth it. It's not, in and of itself, it's not going to make a success of a release. But if it's folded into a broader strategy, then something to consider, as long as you're careful about how you go about it. And if anyone's promising numbers, if anyone's promising a certain number of streams, then don't do it.
I think that's such a good point. You really have to be mindful of this, and especially in today's age with artificial streaming being a real problem across our platform. I think you're right. It is something to really be mindful about. I've got another question. Do you know any faceless artists who are particularly good at marketing and press? Which promotional strategy would you most recommend for such artists? I guess artists that aren't really comfortable being in the limelight. It comes up quite often is some artists are really keen on being super active on social media, some less so. So just any thought on that?
I guess it depends on what the definition of face looks like. There's a lot of artists that will hide their face and have an alter ego, and that can work quite well. One that springs to mind, someone fairly small, is a guy called Doomsday Cult, who he hides his face behind, I guess it's like a deer skull. And he's got, his whole thing is that he's got prophet warning people of the end of the world. And so there's this Discord group with fans of his, several hundred people in there. And it's all about this narrative that the world's going to end. He's the guy that we need to follow. And I'm still unsure whether people are completely serious or not in this group, which I think is always a good thing. And the stuff he makes is like dark wave, synth wave, Crystal Castles, Justice style music. So it's all vaguely like abrasive and apocalyptic. But he's got a really clear content strategy where it's like him in a field. He's got his skull and antlers and his like big cape on. And I think if you find what that niche is going to be, it can work really well. There's no reason it can't work just as well as someone who's showing their face. If what you mean by faceless artist is an artist who doesn't want to do any content, doesn't want to do any press, doesn't really want to talk about the music or push it, it's probably going to struggle a little bit more.
Totally agree. I think it comes back to rebuilding a great narrative, whatever the artist looks like or whether or not they want to show their face. I think we all love Daft Punk, and this is the perfect example of not ever showing your face, but actually building amazing world and narrative around your music and having a great marketing strategy around that. So that just is not optional, essentially. I think you're right.
Exactly.
Yeah. Great. Well, thanks so much, Sam. We are running out of time. Really appreciate your insights. It's been really great to have thought on all these questions and topics. There's a lot more to cover, but I think we've hopefully answered some of the questions around streaming and strategies. As I said, we will be sending a webinar via email to everyone that registered. So look out for that. We are also will be announcing our next webinar very soon. I guess last question for you, Sam, is if anyone wants to reach out, is there any website or email that they can reach out to you either on directly?
Yeah, sure. You can find Songular anywhere on the internet, basically. Instagram is @Songular. Email is sam@songular.co. And the website is songular.co. So if anyone's got any questions or wants to discuss anything more, then I'm very open. It'd be great to hear from you.
Well, thank you. For us, Revelator, it's time to close this webinar. Please do check out our Revelator website and our blogs, news, company news, and social media. And again, we'll be sending an email shortly with the webinar. So hopefully you'll have access to that. And we hope to see you shortly. Sam, I hope to see you also in person very soon. And I'm sure we'll catch up at an event or conference, hopefully in the future.
Sounds good. Look forward to it. Thank you, Zach. Thanks, everyone.